Wait a second. Yes. Next presenter is Peter, talking about his experience in FOSS.
Great. Yeah, hello. Thank you for having me. So, I graduated university 9 years ago. I came from a course that was primarily silicon physics, photonics, lasers, so on and so forth. Very little VLSI design, so I came in kind of blind to the industry. Since then, getting to know the industry, I've spent an awful lot of my time and breath advocating for startups to use open source silicon and open source tools. I've practiced what I preached. I've even started an event in Bristol, where I live, to try and get companies to come together and talk about the way that they're using these tools. And then 2 years ago, I was given this amazing opportunity to join a brand new startup and put an open methodology at the heart of its engineering process. So I started as a design engineer, but in the 2 years I spent with the team, I sort of ascended up to a VP of engineering position. I brought in a lot of tools that I had for my sort of personal projects. We adopted Ferrolator, Yosis, CocoaDB, and we developed a number of libraries in-house, and we published these, and we spoke about these at AutoConf last year. The startup failed. Rather sadly, earlier this year, we failed to close investment. We had to wind down. Our team moved on to new positions. So was I wrong? Was I wrong to have pushed so hard to put open methodology at the start of a process? Should we have just gone to a vendor and said, please come in? We'll buy all the commercial flows. Were we wasting time building these internal tools, publishing them, investing so much energy and emotion in them? So I've weighed this up in my mind, and I've worked for a number of companies in the past where I didn't have that large a voice, and these are maybe a few of the arguments that maybe you've heard if you've tried to do this in your company. These things reveal too many of our secrets. It gives others in the industry a leg up. It allows it to compete with us on our playing field. It allows them to run ahead of us faster. It wastes our time. We can't have our team spending all their time supporting these commercial, these open source projects and dealing with community engagement. Or it makes it easy for you to leave. You've built this lovely tool, you're really proud of it, we can see that you're really engaged with it, and if we allow it to be open source, well, what's to stop you walking out the door and running away? You can take this with you. The thing is, a lot of these have really easy arguments against them. So your problem isn't unique. Don't fool yourself. Everyone in the industry has a wiring generator. Everyone in the industry has a register generator. Just because you've built one, you're really proud of it. Don't think everyone else hasn't done this. Talk to other people. You'll hear about these same challenges and same problems. The thing about giving other people a leg up, it allows other people to help you too. I've put libraries out there. I've supported them. I've had numerous issues and pull requests raised to fix issues that I hadn't spotted in my own libraries. Arguing that writing better docs and better unit tests is a waste of your time, well, have a think about this. If you just built your entire project on fragile foundations, there's a balance to strike here between pragmatism and perfection, but really, your bar should be a bit higher than just like, well, our CI hasn't crashed in a week, so, it's fine. And from recent experience, our team went through an awful lot in the early part of this year, but one of the things that seemed to keep us together was this kind of, we were really proud of the stuff we built. We were really proud of the stuff we got to show off. And that was so much of a part of our culture that it was a really strong bonding between our team. And it kept us there through really quite difficult times. So I'd argue, that last point of making it easier to leave, I don't think it's necessarily true if your company supports it right. But water is wet, the sky is blue. Given you've attended an open source conference, this probably isn't news to you. So what did I learn? I went through this. We spent a lot of time investing in tools and technology. Can I give you some useful tips to take away? So number one, infrastructure and compute. It's not something that's actually talked about at these conferences so much. Yeah, we talk about flows. We talk about these build flows and how they work. We don't ever actually talk about the infrastructure they run on. You need to go out there and you need to set up a grid engine. You need to deploy LDAP, NFS servers, all this sort of stuff when you start to scale up your team. And actually, the way your flow interacts with that is really important, and we don't talk about it. spend wisely. A lot of companies out there with cloud infrastructure, they'll give you these enticing startup packages. Be aware of how quickly your cloud costs ramp. On-prem compute actually can be quite cheap. It's about a year break even. If you do a year commit on cloud compute, you can pretty much buy the same compute yourself in about a year, including your electricity costs, including your backup costs to the cloud, including your internet provider. So do your research. Don't just believe that going to the cloud is the right thing to do. If you do either build out a lot of cloud compute or you do on-prem, learn about infrastructure as code. You will probably have configured a few services, you'll have got everything working just right, and then you need to add another server and suddenly you need to configure it all again. So there's great frameworks out there for this. Ansible, Puppet, Terraform, they're not things that generally you hear at this conference, but they're things to go and look into. And they can make that difference between your infrastructure being a support burden and being really easy to scale up and down and fix problems. And finally, to slightly adopt someone else's phrase, the best computer is the one you have with you. If you can do your work on your laptop, if you're not having to log into a farm and deal with scheduling and waiting for other people to do things and licenses become available, if you can be productive on your own laptop, that enables huge productivity for your team. It is difficult to get environments that work reproducibly. There's great frameworks for it. Nix, you can do stuff with Docker, you can do stuff with GUIX, as we've heard. It does take time and it does take understanding to build up, but it is worth investing in, almost definitely. So, not to be, to miss out from this opportunity, we built our own compute infrastructure, and I've written these 2 blog posts basically detailing the compute we bought and why it was a financially good decision, and then how we set it up, the tools that we used, how we deployed it, things to think about if you were to do this yourself. So if these are useful to you, please take a read. Point 2, your team will build fantastic tools. Over time, these will become more capable. You'll need to grow them. And a Swiss Army knife is great, but you don't want this. Your tools need to stay focused. Understand what your tools should be doing, how they should be interacting with each other. And actually, this is a great argument for why you should open source stuff. If you put stuff out in the open, you kind of create a perimeter around it. You make it a little bit more difficult for stuff in your repository to bleed between different areas. This will massively increase your maintainability. You'll understand exactly what things depend on and why they're working in certain ways. And if you want an example of how this works in practice, look at your terminal. Your bash shell is just a collection of small utilities that you can chain together to get things done. Learn from that and build your tools in that way. We practice this with many of our projects. This diagram's kind of nonsensical, but it just is trying to indicate we had a bunch of tools that work together. These are all open source. Quite a few of them have come from me. Bucket came from Stuart, who was here, who presented last year on this. But we stitched them all together. We stitched in a bunch of open source frameworks around them, including CocoaDB and Verilator. And yeah, all of these are out there, and they all stand alone, but they're all built to work well together. But you don't have to have them all. Final point. The flow is incomplete. As we've just heard, as you get to those back-end stages, you really need some extra support from the vendors still. Icarus, Verilator, CocoaDB, GTK Wave, Surfer, these are fantastic tools in the front-end design world. And yes, you've got OpenRoad and OpenLane that take you into the back-end world. But where's my CDC? Where's my RDC? Where's my modern DFT BIST engines? This isn't a criticism. This is just an observation that actually when you start to get to commercial tapeouts, especially at big scale, there just isn't the stuff in the open source world that allows you to use those tools at that level. The way we've worked around this, we've made our flows modular. You can switch out the tools, you can try new ones out, you can use the right tool for the right job at the right time. Build this in early. Allow yourself to swap between simulators. Using frameworks like CocoaDB is fantastic because you can kind of make that decision about what simulator you need very late in the day. You don't get pigeonholed into, I have to have Verilator because that's the only thing that my test bench works with. And fix rough edges and share them. If you run into something, publish it. Don't have an internal fork. Publish it upstream. Try to get it adopted. Try to build that into your company culture, that it's not held internally as some terrible secret. Make sure it's pushed upstream. So the message here is open tools and methodology will get you a long way, but they won't quite get you all the way at the moment. Where am I now? I've moved to a company called Fractile. in Bristol, along with a number of my colleagues from Vipercore, the startup that failed. We are building AI inference accelerators, and we've brought in and strengthened a methodology that was already inside the company of using open tools and flows. I've highlighted some of the ones we're using here, but the list goes on and on. It is a really strong practice, and especially within Bristol, this sort of community is live and living. But yeah, just to highlight here quite what we're doing. So, thank you.
Very nice, thank you. Questions? Julius.
Great talk. It's great to hear someone like evangelize, preaching to the converted, of course, but hearing, hearing stories from the trenches about, really doing things with these tools is always welcome. The arguments you put forward for why you should, or rather, the arguments you faced against, or asking questions why we should be using open source. In reality, how did they go in the past? Like, did you have management that bought in, or is it a bit of a mixed bag?
I think the thing is, I've joined companies. The companies that I joined that heard those arguments, I joined very late in the day, in sort of their life cycle, and these things are very difficult to retrofit. People who have a lot of infrastructure and a lot of tooling, it's often very interlinked, and trying to draw that back out again when you haven't had that foundation is very, very difficult. And it is, how do I get my manager to give me 3 weeks to try and extract this tool when actually it's at no commercial benefit to the company? So I think it depends where you join in the life cycle of that organization, whether or not you face those challenges.
Yeah. No, I think there's plenty of very good examples, as you say, of like open sourcing tooling. CocoaDB was a great example, right? Chris and Stu were at, what was it called? What was the networking thing they were at in Cambridge? Solarflare, yes. And they open sourced that, and look at that, right? Like that, had they still been using that infrastructure, like it would have, been considered a success beyond their wildest dreams in terms of what it turned into. So I think there's good examples of that, but yeah, certainly there might be a bit of like a hurdle to get over at the beginning of like convincing people of that. So the more success stories, the better I feel in this area. So.
Any other question? People want a coffee. So thank you very much, Peter. So please wait a second, Philip.